A human skeleton lies buried beneath thousands of years of dust. Its teeth are rotten. Its spine is bent. Its bones tell the story of a lifetime spent doing the same exhausting work every single day. Now, compare it to another skeleton found nearby, one that's thousands of years older. This person was taller, stronger. Their teeth were healthier. Their joints showed far less wear. The shocking part? The healthier skeleton belonged to a hunter-gatherer. The broken one belonged to a farmer. For generations, we've been taught that agriculture was humanity's greatest achievement, the breakthrough that led to civilization, science, cities, and eventually the modern world. But what if it also made life worse? What if the invention that built every empire in history also trapped humanity in a cycle we've never escaped? Because when our ancestors planted their first fields around 11,000 years ago, they didn't simply change how they found food. They changed what it meant to be human. And once that change began, there was no going back. For over 95% of human history, people didn't live in cities. There were no kings, no taxes, no borders, no permanent homes. Our ancestors moved with the seasons, following migrating animals and gathering whatever nature provided. It wasn't an easy life, but it also wasn't the brutal existence that popular culture often imagines. Archaeological evidence suggests many hunter-gatherers enjoyed surprisingly diverse diets. Instead of depending on just a few crops, they ate hundreds of different plants, fruits, nuts, fish, and wild animals throughout the year. If one food source disappeared, they simply moved somewhere else. Mobility was survival. Their bodies reflected this lifestyle. They walked enormous distances. They climbed, they hunted, they carried everything they owned. Their bones became dense and strong from constant movement. Dental decay was uncommon because refined carbohydrates didn't exist. Diseases spread slowly because people lived in small groups that rarely stayed in one place for long. By modern standards, life was dangerous. But biologically, humans were remarkably well adapted to it. So why would anyone willingly abandon that lifestyle? Why would entire populations choose endless farming over freedom? The answer begins with something humanity has never been able to control: climate. Around 12,000 years ago, the last ice age was finally coming to an end. Glaciers retreated, rainfall patterns changed, temperatures climbed. Across parts of the Middle East, especially in an area we now call the Fertile Crescent, wild wheat and barley spread across enormous landscapes. For the first time, food became so abundant in certain places that some groups no longer needed to keep moving. Instead of following nature, nature came to them. These people, known today as the Natufians, began building permanent homes, not because they had invented farming, but because they didn't need to. Wild grain grew almost at their doorstep. It looked like the beginning of a golden age. Then, without warning, everything changed. The climate suddenly reversed. Temperatures dropped dramatically. Rainfall declined. The lush fields that had supported these early settlements began to disappear. Wild animals changed their migration routes. Reliable food became unpredictable. Entire communities faced a choice that would reshape human history: abandon their villages and return to the old nomadic life, or force the land to produce food. It was a desperate gamble, one that would alter our species forever. Because the first farmers didn't set out to build civilization. They were simply trying to survive. Yet their solution would eventually create cities, governments, writing, armies, empires, and a world that now supports more than 8 billion people. But it would also bring inequality, disease, war, and lives defined by endless labor. The agricultural revolution wasn't just the beginning of civilization. It was the moment humans entered a bargain with nature, one whose price we're still paying today. For thousands of years, Earth's climate was anything but stable. Ice ages came and went. Entire forests appeared, then vanished. Sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of feet. Human beings survived by doing what they had always done, adapting and moving. Whenever the environment changed, they simply packed up and followed the food. Mobility was their greatest advantage. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened. The Ice Age loosened its grip. Temperatures climbed. Rainfall increased. Across the Fertile Crescent, stretching from modern-day Iraq through Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and parts of Turkey, wild grasses exploded across the landscape. Among them were wild wheat and barley. These weren't the neat fields we imagine today. They were vast natural meadows, dense enough to feed entire communities without anyone planting a single seed. For the first time in human history, some people found a place so rich in resources that they stopped wandering. These communities are known today as the Natufians. They built stone houses, they dug storage pits, they crafted grinding stones to process grain. They buried their dead in organized cemeteries. It looked like humanity had finally found permanence. But nature had one more surprise. Around 10,900 BCE, the planet plunged back into a period of intense cold. Scientists call it the Younger Dryas. No one knows exactly what caused it. Some researchers point to massive floods from melting glaciers disrupting ocean currents. Others suggest a combination of natural climate shifts. Whatever the cause, the effects were devastating. Within just a few generations, rainfall declined, wild grain fields shrank, game animals became harder to find, entire ecosystems changed. Imagine spending your entire life in a village that suddenly could no longer feed your family. The old solution was obvious: leave. Return to the nomadic lifestyle your ancestors had perfected over hundreds of thousands of years. Some groups did exactly that, but others stayed. Why? Because abandoning permanent homes wasn't easy anymore. These communities had invested years building shelters, they had burial grounds filled with generations of ancestors. They had storage pits, tools, and social networks rooted in one place. Walking away meant abandoning an entire way of life. So instead of following nature, they tried to control it. Perhaps someone noticed that grains dropped near camp sprouted the following season. Perhaps people cleared weeds around the healthiest plants. Perhaps they carried seeds closer to reliable water sources. At first, these actions were small, almost accidental. No one woke up one morning and declared, "Today, we're inventing agriculture." It happened gradually, one season at a time, one harvest after another. One simple decision repeated for generations. And without realizing it, humans began changing the evolution of plants themselves. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. It wasn't just humans shaping wheat. Wheat was shaping humans too. Every year, people spent more time tending fields, more time clearing land, more time protecting crops from animals. Their lives slowly revolved around the harvest. The relationship had become a partnership, but it wasn't an equal one. The more food the fields produced, the more children communities could support. Larger families needed larger harvests, Larger harvests required larger fields, and larger fields demanded even more labor. It became a cycle that fed itself. The first farmers believed they were controlling nature. In reality, nature had found a way to control them. And the greatest accomplice in that transformation was a humble plant growing quietly in the hills. Wild wheat. A species that would eventually reshape the destiny of humanity. At first glance, wheat doesn't seem like a world-changing plant. It's just grass. No claws, no teeth, no intelligence. And yet, this simple plant would eventually conquer nearly every civilization on Earth. But it couldn't have done it alone. To understand why, we need to look at a tiny genetic mutation. In the wild, wheat has a clever survival strategy. When its seeds mature, the stalk becomes brittle. A strong gust of wind, or the brush of an animal, is enough to snap the seed head apart, scattering hundreds of grains across the landscape. It's an incredibly successful way to reproduce. But for humans, it was a nightmare. By the time people arrived to harvest it, much of the grain had already fallen onto the ground. Collecting enough food was slow, frustrating, and inefficient. Then, nature introduced a mistake. Every once in a while, a wheat plant was born with a mutation. Its stalk didn't break. The seeds stayed attached. For the plant, this mutation was disastrous. If no one came along, the seeds remained trapped on the stalk and died there. In the wild, these mutant plants should have disappeared forever. Instead, humans unknowingly saved them. When early gatherers cut wheat with flint sickles, which plants were easiest to collect? Not the ones that had already scattered their seeds, the ones still holding every grain. Without realizing it, people selected those rare mutant plants year after year. The best harvest became next year's seed, then the following year, and the year after that. Generation by generation, humans reshaped the genetics of wheat. Within a few thousand years, wild wheat had become something entirely new, a domesticated crop. But here's the fascinating part. The relationship worked both ways. As wheat evolved to depend on humans, humans evolved to depend on wheat. Every year demanded more labor. Fields had to be cleared, seeds planted, weeds removed, animals driven away, harvests stored safely before winter. There were no weekends, no vacations. The crops dictated the calendar. Miss the planting season? You starved. Lose the harvest? Your children starved. Life was no longer organized around migration or opportunity. It revolved around the field. In a strange twist of history, humans believed they had domesticated wheat. But perhaps wheat had domesticated humans. After all, which species spread across the planet? Humans certainly multiplied, but so did wheat. Today, wheat covers hundreds of millions of acres across the globe. It exists on every inhabited continent. Its survival no longer depends on the wind. It depends on billions of people who wake up every morning to plant it, irrigate it, harvest it, transport it, and protect it. No wild grass has ever achieved such evolutionary success. And wheat wasn't the only species changing. As fields expanded, another revolution was quietly unfolding. This one had horns, sharp teeth, and a very bad temper. For thousands of years, humans had hunted wild goats and sheep whenever they could. But somewhere in the rugged mountains of the Near East, people began treating these animals differently. Instead of killing every animal they found, they started making choices. The strongest adult females were often left alive. Very young males became the preferred target. At first, archaeologists couldn't understand why. Then they examined thousands of animal bones recovered from ancient villages. The pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't random hunting. It was management. Early humans had discovered a simple truth. A herd with many females and only a few breeding males could grow rapidly. Rather than chasing animals across mountains every season, why not keep the herd close, feed it, protect it, breed it, and harvest it only when necessary? It was one of the most important ideas in human history. Animals were no longer just prey. They had become living food supplies. That single change would transform not only the landscape, but human civilization itself. Once humans learned to grow crops, another realization followed. If plants could be controlled, why not animals? For thousands of years, hunters had followed migrating herds across mountains, forests, and grasslands. It was exhausting, unpredictable. Some hunts ended in celebration. Others ended in starvation. But farming had changed the rules. People were no longer moving across the landscape. Now they needed food to come to them. The solution was simple in theory. Instead of chasing animals, keep the animals close. At first, this wasn't true domestication. Early farmers simply captured young goats and sheep instead of killing them. They built crude enclosures from wood and stone. They protected the animals from predators. They fed them through harsh winters. The tamest animals survived. The most aggressive were slaughtered. Generation after generation, humans unknowingly became agents of evolution once again. The wild ancestors of modern livestock were nothing like the animals we know today. Wild goats were fiercely territorial. Wild sheep scattered at the slightest sign of danger. The ancestors of cattle, massive creatures known as aurochs, could stand nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder and were powerful enough to kill a hunter with a single charge. These animals weren't born to live beside humans. They had to be changed. And so, over centuries, humans selected for one trait above all others: docility. The calmest animals reproduced. The most violent did not. Slowly, horns became smaller. Bodies became more compact. Aggression faded. Animals that once fled from humans began depending on them for food and protection. It was one of the greatest biological transformations in history. By changing a few generations, humanity changed entire species forever. But domestication offered far more than meat. Goats provided milk. Sheep produced wool. Oxen pulled heavy loads. Later, cattle would pull plows capable of cultivating far more land than human hands alone. For the first time, people possessed a reliable source of food that could be stored alive. A herd wasn't just dinner. It was wealth. It could grow, multiply, be traded, passed down to children, and defended from rivals. Ownership itself began taking on a whole new meaning. Yet this new lifestyle came with an invisible danger, one that no one could see, one that would kill millions. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had lived in small, mobile bands. If someone caught a contagious illness, it rarely spread very far. The group simply moved on. The disease often died with its host. Permanent villages changed everything. Now dozens, sometimes hundreds, of people live together every day. They slept close to one another, shared water, shared food, and shared the air they breathed. Even more importantly, they now lived side by side with animals: goats, sheep, pigs, cattle, chickens, species that carried countless bacteria and viruses of their own. Most of these microorganisms had never encountered humans before. Now they had endless opportunities. Every meal, every shelter, every shared water source, every animal pen. A disease that once affected only livestock could mutate, adapt, then infect people. Historians believe many of humanity's deadliest diseases trace their origins back to this ancient partnership between humans and domesticated animals. Influenza, measles, tuberculosis, and much later, smallpox. Not all emerged at exactly the same time, but agriculture created the perfect conditions for them to evolve. For the first time, pathogens had something they had never enjoyed before: a permanent supply of human hosts. The irony was cruel. The same villages that protected people from hunger also exposed them to entirely new dangers. Food became more reliable. Health often became worse. Archaeologists can still see the evidence today.
Skeletons from early farming communities tell a heartbreaking story. Children with stunted growth, bones marked by chronic malnutrition, teeth eaten away by cavities, joints worn down from years of repetitive labor. Compared to their hunter-gatherer ancestors, many of these early farmers were shorter, less healthy, and physically exhausted. So why didn't they stop? If farming demanded harder work, created new diseases, and often produced poorer health, why did agriculture spread across the world instead of disappearing? The answer wasn't better lives. It was bigger populations. And that simple fact would change everything. At first, farming seemed like a remarkable success. A single field could produce far more calories than hunting and gathering over the same area. For the first time in history, families could produce a food surplus. And that surplus changed everything. More food meant more children could survive. Parents who once struggled to raise 2 or 3 children could now support much larger families. Within only a few generations, villages expanded. Dozens of people became hundreds. Hundreds became thousands. It looked like humanity had discovered the perfect formula for prosperity.
But there was a hidden problem. Every new child needed food. More mouths required more farmland. More farmland demanded more labor. The solution to every problem was simply to grow even more food. It became a cycle that could never stop. Imagine a village of 100 people. If farming allows that village to grow into 200 people, life might still seem manageable. But what happens when a drought destroys half the harvest? A hunter-gatherer band could move somewhere else. A farming village couldn't. Its fields, its homes, its grain stores, its livestock, everything was tied to one place. Leaving meant abandoning years of work. Staying meant risking starvation. Agriculture had created something humanity had never experienced before: dependence. And with dependence came another revolutionary idea: ownership. A hunter-gatherer couldn't own a forest, or a river, or a herd of wild deer. Nature belonged to everyone. But a wheat field was different. Someone had planted it. Someone had cleared the land. Someone had spent months protecting it from animals and thieves. The harvest belonged to them. For the first time, land itself became valuable.
Families began marking territory. Boundaries appeared. Disputes became inevitable. Because once something has value, someone else will want it. Archaeologists see this change in remarkable places like Çatalhöyük, one of the world's earliest large farming settlements. Thousands of people lived there in tightly packed mud brick homes. There were no streets. People walked across rooftops and climbed into their homes using ladders through openings in the ceiling. But the most extraordinary discovery wasn't above ground. It was beneath the floor. The dead were buried directly under family homes. Generation after generation rested beneath the same house. Why? Perhaps because the home wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was an inheritance, a symbol that this place belonged to a particular family. Their ancestors lived here. Their descendants would live here too. Land had become identity. As villages expanded, another challenge emerged. Someone had to organize the harvest. Someone had to decide how grain would be stored. Someone had to settle arguments over water, fields, and livestock. Simple communities slowly became more complex. Certain people stopped farming altogether.
Instead, they became full-time builders, potters, toolmakers, religious leaders, administrators. Not because they grew food, but because someone else grew enough to feed them. This was the birth of specialization. It sounds like progress, and in many ways it was. Specialization allowed technology to advance faster than ever before. But it also introduced something humanity had rarely experienced on such a scale: inequality. For the first time, not everyone contributed in the same way. Not everyone owned the same amount. Some families accumulated larger harvests, more livestock, more land, more influence. Wealth could now be stored, protected, passed from one generation to the next. The seeds of social class had been planted alongside the crops, and once those seeds began to grow, the world would never look the same again. By the time the first farming villages had become thriving settlements, humanity had crossed a line from which there was no return. Agriculture had done far more than change our diet. It had transformed the entire structure of society. With reliable harvests came surplus food. And wherever surplus existed, someone had to protect it. Someone had to count it. Someone had to distribute it.
Before long, grain was no longer just food. It became wealth. It could be stored for years, traded for tools, exchanged for livestock, collected as payment, even used to reward soldiers. For the first time in history, power could be measured not by strength alone, but by control over resources. Those who controlled the granaries soon controlled the people. To manage growing populations, new systems emerged. Rules became laws. Village elders became rulers. Religious leaders claimed divine authority over the harvest. Warriors defended fields, and sometimes conquered new ones. As communities expanded, memory was no longer enough. Someone had to keep records. How much grain was harvested? Who owned which field? Who had paid their share? Out of this need came one of humanity's greatest inventions: writing. The earliest written symbols weren't poems or philosophy. They were records, lists, inventories, receipts. Civilization didn't begin with literature. It began with bookkeeping. Soon, cities rose across river valleys. The great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and later China all depended on the same foundation: agriculture. Without farmers, there would have been no pyramids.
No temples, no palaces, no empires. Every monument humanity has ever built rests upon fields first planted thousands of years ago. But the agricultural revolution left us with another inheritance, one that still shapes our world today: inequality. Some families accumulated land. Others worked it. Some governed. Others obeyed. Some lived in comfort because countless others labored from sunrise to sunset. This wasn't simply the result of ambitious kings or ruthless conquerors. The foundations had been laid long before. When food could be stored, it could also be controlled. And when it could be controlled, power became concentrated. That pattern has echoed throughout history. From ancient kingdoms to medieval empires to modern nations. Even today, our lives remain tied to the same bargain our ancestors made 11,000 years ago. Our supermarkets, our economies, our cities, even the device you're watching this video on, all exist because humanity chose to settle down and cultivate the land. Yet the question remains, was it worth it?
Hunter-gatherers lived shorter lives on average and faced constant dangers from predators, accidents, and the uncertainties of nature. Farmers built civilizations, but often paid with harder labor, poorer health, new diseases, and growing inequality. History doesn't give us a simple answer. The agricultural revolution wasn't entirely a triumph, nor was it entirely a tragedy. It was a trade-off, a bargain that gave humanity incredible power while demanding enormous sacrifice. Perhaps that's the lesson hidden beneath the bones of our ancestors. Progress is rarely free. Every great breakthrough solves one problem, while creating another. And maybe the greatest irony of all is this. We often say that humans domesticated plants and animals, but perhaps the opposite is closer to the truth. By persuading us to clear forests, build villages, raise families, and spend our lives tending their fields, plants like wheat transformed the entire course of human history. They didn't need armies. They didn't need kings. They simply needed us to keep planting. And for 11,000 years, we've never stopped. The next time you pass a field of wheat, remember, you're not just looking at a crop. You're looking at one of the most successful species in Earth's history. A species that didn't merely feed humanity. It changed what humanity would become.
History isn't just the story of what we built. It's the story of what changed us. If you'd like to discover more of them, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps bring these stories to life and allows us to continue exploring humanity's greatest discoveries, lost civilizations, and defining moments. Until next time, thank you for watching.